My name is Paul Stewart. I'm 72 years old, and I'm your father. St. Elmo, Colorado, located 20 miles southwest of Buena Vista, was a mining town first settled in by Amber Ellis Wright in 1871. He had discovered an unusually high-grade vein of silver ore on Crystallite Mountain, 4 miles from the future location of St. Elmo. The mine was named Mary Murphy and eventually became the most successful mine in the district. At its peak in 1881, St. Elmo had around 2,000 residents and a large variety of businesses, including hotels, restaurants, saloons, clothing stores, a drugstore, bank, post office, blacksmith, city hall, and a firehouse. In the late 1880s, the mine started to dry up, and by the 1890s, several fires had destroyed many of St. Elmo's businesses. While many people left, some did stay until the Mary Murphy mine officially closed in 1936. And by 1940, it was a complete ghost town. Today, St. Elmo is considered one of the best preserved ghost towns in the West. My great-grandparents, Patrick and Sarah Mullins, came over from Ireland and settled in the Escanaba, Michigan area. And they had 10 children, and after the first four, they moved to St. Elmo because of the mining district there, and they opened a boarding house for the miners that were there at the base of the mine. They took care of the miners, they fed them, and then they changed their bedding. And they lived actually in St. Elmo, and the mine was about 2 miles away. And for reasons I'm not sure, a little town called Alpine developed just about a half a mile from St. Elmo. And that's where they actually had their cabin. And my grandmother, Elizabeth Mullins, was born in Alpine, Colorado in 1881. And she lived there until, I believe, about the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the family moved to Cripple Creek, and then from there they moved to Leadville, and that's where her parents, Patrick and Sarah Mullins, are buried in Leadville, Colorado. And looking at this picture, we believe it's the family picture taken in about 1892 or 1893. And the reason we believe this is my grandma, and she appears to be 12 or 13 years old. And here's her parents. This is Patrick Mullins and Sarah Mullins, and they were the ones that came from Escanaba and settled in that area. This in the background is their boarding house, and these are the miners that used to board there. They also had 10 children, and as I look at this picture, there's only about 7 of them in here. We have this boy, and this girl, and these 2 boys, and this girl, and then of course my grandmother. And we're figuring that the boys were standing here because they wanted to be more associated with the miners, and then the rest of the younger children were on this side. Back in 2014, when I was in St. Elmo, we made the trip up to the base of the mine where the boarding house was, and it is still there. And as you can see, it's in a bad shape, but we do believe that this is the boarding house that they operated, and that picture earlier was taken in front of it. This is a school in St. Elmo that my grandmother went to, and her brothers and sisters. Like I said earlier, there were 10 brothers and sisters, and when we were there, we were able to see some of the records, and it indicated that Elizabeth Mullins and Hugh Mullins, and I believe Mary Mullins, were all in attendance. They were at different grade levels, but we were able to see their report cards and how many days they were absent or tardy. And we were inside the schoolhouse, and it was quite interesting. There were a lot of stuff from, it looks like, the 1800s, including the desks and chairs and chalkboards that the students used. My brother and I went to Buena Vista, and we researched the Historical Society archives, and we found this paper dated July 28th, 1894, and it's an article about the school in St. Elmo. And we were very interested as it lists Lizzie Mullins, and that's Elizabeth Mullins, who was my grandmother. And it's said that they were all in school. None of them were ever absent, and they all had grades of 90 or better. Those records were about the last thing around because back in 2002, the courthouse burned down, and many of the records were lost. But I'm not exactly sure how, but Moon Mullins was able to get some of those records that were left over, and he had them with him when we were in St. Elmo. And Moon Mullins did pass away last year in 2020. This is a picture of the Mary Murphy mine. This is actually the entrance to the mine shaft. I'm not sure when it was taken, but I would imagine in probably around 1890, maybe 92 or 3. And in this picture, we have Patrick Mullins on the very bottom of the ladder right there. And he really wasn't a miner, but he'd go up there with them. And when I'm not sure why this picture was taken, but he did run the boarding house at that time. As we saw earlier in that picture, the family, there were 10 children. And in that picture, there are only 7 because the older boy had already left. And they also had 2 young daughters that died of diphtheria. There's a local cemetery up there called Iron City Mine, and that's where their resting place is. It is marked by my Aunt Hazel, and the 2 children there are Gertie Mullins and Sarah Sadie Mullins. And she wrote on the headstone that they were born a year apart, they died a day apart, and they're buried a hand apart. When I was about 12 years old, 13, we used to go to Grandma's house quite often, and she would tell us stories about living in St. Elmo. And she told us a story about how the Ute Indians used to come through there twice a year. They were a migratory tribe. They lived in the mountains in the summer and down in the Arkansas Valley in the winter, so they made 2 transitions through Chalk Creek, which is right at St. Elmo. And she said that when they would see the Indians starting to migrate and come through town, that her mother would take the boards up on the floor of their cabin and make all the children hide under there until the Indians passed through. And she said that happened twice a year for several years. This is a postcard I'm looking at from around 1910. It's a postcard addressed to my grandmother, Miss Lizzie Stewart, and it's from her mother, Sarah Mullins. It's very hard to read. My brother tried to decipher it, and the best he could do is it says, "To my dear daughter, just heard from Jack today and he's getting along fine. We'll write a letter next week. I'm out of stamps tonight. Meanie," that's Grandma's sister, is out on that, but they don't know what. Was called Sunday night, so I'm left busy. We are all well, and I hope you are all well too. With love from all to all, ever your loving mother.